All right. So my name is Nathan Provost. I am currently meeting with Jenny Haile. Uh, it is November 20th, 2020. The location of the interview is over Zoom through my residence and the interviewees. And the proposed subject is on Tried 10 Consulting. Jenny Haile is the CEO of Tried 10 Consulting. And so we'll be talking a little bit about that today with Jenny. Jenny, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate having you here.
My pleasure.
So can you just tell me a little bit about your background? Where did you go to school? What primarily got you into business and consulting?
Sure. So it's kind of a random path, quite frankly.
Okay.
So I went to the University of Kansas for my undergrad, and it was actually in political science. And so when I went into college, I wanted to eventually end up in Washington and save the world. That was the goal. After I got my degree, I was like, I don't think I'm ready to go to Washington. So I pursued a master's. And it really was more of by happenstance that I ended up doing my master's also at KU, but it was in public administration. So I literally have never taken a business course. And so I think that's one of the interesting things that has kind of helped me and also hindered, of course, as we've grown the business. But once I went through my master's degree, that actually took me to the state of Kansas, is where I did my internship and got very heavily involved into their systems. And so at that point, after about 5 years of working with state government and the different agencies on different applications, still all within the human resource space. And so all HR laws, all of those things, that's really where I was getting my foundation. At that point, that's when Arthur Andersen came calling and said, we need people with your experience to come into the particular application was PeopleSoft at that point. So, I joined Andersen, said, let's be a business consultant. Why not? And so at that point, I really wasn't planning on making a career out. There was no class that I had taken about consulting. There was no really it just wasn't on my radar. It literally just fell in place. And so then I think as I was able to do a variety of clients with Andersen, and then of course it kind of imploded. And so then we did MarketSphere. And when we started that company, that was a regional based consulting company. And it really did give me the first taste of this is how you start a business. Right. So Andersen was well established, just like Deloitte, just like all of the other big ones at that point. But MarketSphere was a brand new startup. And so I got to see behind the scenes of these are all the different little things that need to go in place to still deliver a good, solid product to customers and your clients, but yet all this stuff that they never even see because it's just done magically behind the curtain. So that always stuck with me. And then once we got to a point with MarketSphere where I knew that I just needed to take the next step. And I was fortunate, a past client of mine actually decided to reach out and say, we have a very large project that's going to be going on for at least the next year or year and a half. We really need your skill set with it. And so the other lesson that I took away, I think from our MarketSphere start was have revenue on day one and know to make sure that you've got revenue coming in. And so I just took that opportunity where I knew I'd have guaranteed revenue for multiple months and departed MarketSphere at that point and started Try 10. And we've just been kind of going ever since. And it's been a very small, I wouldn't even call it regional. It's really just been the Kansas City clients that had either worked with me in the past or through word of mouth have heard that I help clients, and it's just kind of grown from there.
That's really interesting. I think it's really cool that it sounds like it's your experience that really got you there, maybe not necessarily through the education courses or anything like that, but it was just kind of those stepping stones is where that got you. That's very cool.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's just been really organic, It's
yeah.
just been like, "Oh, that looks good. Sure, let's go there." So,
I think that's how we all kind of follow our lives. It's always kind of like a winding road. Um,
absolutely.
so speaking of Try 10, could you actually explain how your consulting business works? How
Sure.
did you know that it would improve other businesses or improve upon other people's lives?
Yeah, so Try 10, it's really based off of change management. So that's the thing that I have always done. And so it's not change management in the term of a technology sense, where that's more of an iterative process and or rev versions, those kinds of things. When I talk about change management, it kind of falls within some human capital areas and practices. It falls within organizational design, some elements of those. But it's really just at its simplest, we help people identify who is going to be impacted by some big change in the company. We identify what information they need to be told. So the communication that they need, not only just when everything changes on day one, but what do you need to lead them up to, right? To get to day one, and then the training piece of it. So I've taken all of those, and there's, so many different methods and approaches and assessments and all sorts of things in this change management world. And what we have really done is try to remove as much of that piece and just get to tactical practices and what the minimum is to really help an organization move and go forward. So it's easy on how does it help people, because I mean it's guaranteeing that those employees that are having some big change happen to them are actually going to be prepared. They're either going to be at least aware of it, right? Or hopefully if they adopt all the information and absorb the information, they'll actually be fully prepared and have ownership for when that change comes.
Okay. All right. So then, how are you able to read these market signals? So how do you anticipate a customer's needs then?
Yeah, so the nice piece about it, and with my business model, Nate, is that it's a very niche practice.
Okay.
So up to this point, it really has been system technology type of implementations, large scale, type of. So how do they enter their time, right? Clock in. How do they manage all their customer information? CRM type of things. So my experience, has been for a couple of decades now. How do you get system technology changes to quickly be adapted by your employees? And
Okay.
so, honestly, it's my own experience of knowing what to anticipate and trying to just kind of hear some of those indicators that I know are coming. The other thing, go ahead.
Sorry, I was actually just going to ask if you could kind of explain some of those indicators that you had just mentioned. Maybe you were getting to those, and I just
Yeah,
interrupted.
no, it's all good. So I think with the indicators, right, it's because I keep it so basic,
Mhm,
right? It literally is just answering simple questions of who is going to be impacted.
mhm.
And then it's just asking some of the leadership or whoever is talking about this initiative that's coming,
Yeah.
just even ask them, have you even thought about who is actually fully impacted? And you'd be surprised by just that simple question that, I'd say 50-50, they come back and go, well, we know the three main people, but yet they may have 500 employees. And I'm like, I think we have a few more than three. And so then you just simply go into that next question for me, which is, when are you planning on making these changes? And they go, oh, we have to tell them about it before we actually do it. And like, yep, you do. And then you talk about where and what are the things they're going to be asked to do differently. And so seriously, indicators is a very formal word.
Right.
It's the basic questions, right? And it's just, I think the thing that my clients talk so much about and appreciate so much is that the lens that I bring to those types of projects is solely focused on the people. And
Hmm.
it's solely focused on a user experience at the end of the project, right? So we're all going crazy trying to get a system to work or try to figure out how it's going to work or all of those things. But the Try 10 eye is always at the end thinking of that user and how are they going to be able to understand it and actually use the piece. So
Right.
it's all bringing that lens into it. And then just by the simple questions. And then, we, back to your business model kind of question, at this point, it's very much scope of a given project with very specific deliverables or documents or things that we create to then leave with the client, whether that's communication plans or whether it's actual training materials,
Yeah.
those types of things. And so it's very much our model right now is still time and materials basically, or very much of an hourly type of, it's estimated this amount of level of effort would be needed in order to complete this type of project along their existing initiative.
Okay. Okay. It's
Does that
very,
make
yeah, yeah. So, just to be clear, what you just explained also is that also the full criteria or measures that you commonly use to improve a client's business? I know we talked about those indicators. I'm not sure if that also falls under the key performance indicators. I'm not sure if you necessarily follow that. I'm just kind of curious if it's more like qualitative, quantitative uh, for that
sense?
measure.
Yeah, qualitative really is the more thing that I have, and this is where the not having the business class in my background, that's where this comes into play
Okay. Okay.
because it really, it's, I wouldn't say I'm a touchy feely as my indicator, but it's definitely more qualitative and it kind of does
Mhm.
the client feel there's value add. Right. So if at some point in time, say that we start out the project
Mhm.
and that it's a 6-month engagement, right? And by the end of the 6 months, they will have a new type of system in place for their 100 employee population. Okay. So
Right.
that's our case that we have. Say that maybe 2 months into that project, all of a sudden the client starts, figuring out their own communication plan, or maybe they hired a corporate communications person. So
Mhm.
then I can simply have the conversation of, this is what I was going to deliver, right? The rest of the project, but you now have a person inside your own company that could do this. So I don't think I'd necessarily add value, and I want to be good stewards of their dollars. And
Mhm.
so if it's more of a, we switch me around to coach that new person instead of being the doer, then we just switch it up. So it's not necessarily a milestone or a specific performance indicator that says, my productivity level will always be at this and I will deliver x number of hours or pages of material or anything like that. It truly is being flexible enough to keep reading what the client is needing and adjusting to that. So I think that's one of the assets or the biggest value add that I can bring, is because so many larger consulting organizations, you have so much structure in place and you do have margins that you have to keep, and you have to keep people billable at certain hours and so many of those other types of metrics that are needed for a large business. But
Mhm.
yet in a smaller, closer to maybe a gig type of economy type of setup, right? I've
Yeah.
got that flexibility, and it's okay for me to be able to change what that looks like for the project. Or if it goes south, I feel very fortunate that I could walk away, with, after a conversation with the client, to say, this really isn't what you guys need. You need this person over here instead. And I'm okay to walk away from that.
Yeah. So then let's talk a little bit about those outcomes. So what outcomes do you actually wish to see for your clients? And while it may go south, as you mentioned, for those clients that do fit that niche that um, you work with, how do you measure? How would you personally measure the success, and also how would that the company measure the success
Yeah.
uh, of that outcome?
It's a great question with it, because I think the main piece of how I kind of measure that success piece is not necessarily off of what I did,
Mhm.
but it's measured off of how the employees do at the end of that piece of it. So we do have some of the adoption rates and those types of things. So as an example, I've worked with a couple of companies that we have put in like performance management type of systems, right? So in a business, typically once or twice a year, you're going through some kind of performance discussion with the employee population. You're documenting some goals, you're documenting how, right? So that kind of a process. And so I've switched what that process looks like with a couple of companies. And so by the end of it, we can actually measure, a percentage of the employees that engage in the new process, that meet the timelines, those types of things. So, on a couple, those two most recent ones that we did, we had over 80% of the employees within just the first rollout actually doing the process and following everything by the timelines, that piece. So we can do a measure per se,
Mhm.
but I put more attention on, were the employees happy with it? Were they understanding it? And then the executives, were they pleased with the information and kind of the end results that they get? And then I think the ultimate, right, benefit that I get, or the best feel of did we do a good job, is, are we asked back to that client, to do a different project, or are we recommended to somebody else, on their behalf, saying, hey, we worked with these people and it was a great thing.
Yeah. No, I think it's always nice to be asked back.
Absolutely, it is.
And be
Yeah,
recommended, right? Yeah.
you got it. You got it.
So now I'm going to hit on a more current event piece,
Woo!
which is COVID. So, yep, I know. Had to,
Yeah,
I had to hit on it.
you do. Absolutely.
So, how does COVID affect your company right now? You can discuss any negative, positive, even positive indicators, but I'll leave the floor open to you.
First biggest thing, welcome to my basement, right? I mean, this is COVID. This is now
Right.
my headquarters, so our business, uh, again, it's small, and I try to keep overhead basically out of it. So we didn't have an office per se. We actually find it more effective to work at the client site. So I would, pre-COVID, I would go to a client site 2 times a week, and work from their desks, be amongst the people, all of those types of things. And when COVID shut down, it that stopped. And so it had to shift everything to working from home, just like so many other businesses did.
Mhm.
um, I think the advantage, so it was a pro for me and our business, is that we were with large enough sized companies that their initiatives kept plowing forward. And
Mhm.
so, it was a little uncertain at that point, back in that March, kind of April timeframe,
Yeah.
because so many of the things that we do, it could be expendable. And all of a sudden we could have been, you know what, we're going to shut down all of those types of projects. And so, Jenny, thanks, but no thanks, you're done. And a lot of my colleagues had to live through that and go through that piece.
Yeah.
Fortunately, though, the larger sized companies that we target,
Yeah.
they kept plugging forward. And so we have had more business and have had more hours and all of those things, actually, since March, than we've had in I'd say recent years, actually.
Really.
Yeah. So it's been interesting from a sense of business of just sheer hours being charged out, the door. I think from a project team perspective, so the people that I'm working with, I would offer probably almost the first 2 months maybe, we're actually helping them to understand how to work remote themselves,
Wow.
because there were so many big companies again. These people would always just go to their desk, eight
Mhm.
to five, they'd be at their desk, and that's all that they knew. So the fact that we had to transition these project teams to, here's a laptop, go find a place in your home to actually work from and make sure that you have all the different things that you need. It took some ramp up time just to even get people to understand how to still be a project team and how to still work together when they're not physically in the same room.
Yeah. And did
So
that,
for us, we got to turn inward a little bit to project
yeah.
teams instead of thinking about all the rest of the employee population.
Right. No, and I just really quick, I was actually just curious. I mean, I'm just curious, did that affect your relationship with the people that you worked with at all in any way, going from virtual like to not being able to meet in person? I'm just, you can,
No, absolutely. It's valid because I think that and I've even mentioned this, if I had been starting a brand new client during this time frame,
right.
it would be so vastly different than what I've done up to this point.
Yeah.
Right? Because a lot of people, they'll sit there and they'll say, well, that's the Jenny special sauce, right? So that may be a nice little way of saying I'm a smartass, right? And so they're just like, oh, okay, we need to keep you a little bit, under wraps. But I think that having that one-on-one, the proximity of just having a casual conversation as you walk down the hall together, you don't have that in this type of a COVID setting. And so we've had to be a little bit more intentional with the clients to reach out and to try to figure out, maybe it's at the beginning of each meeting, or maybe it's just in between a break that I know that we're all having, where I'll give them a quick text, and just something that's not business related, but that's just about being a human and just trying to help them, hey, I'm thinking about you, or hey, I just saw this bird fly, past my window. What are you seeing out yours? Any of those kinds of things. The other thing that we've worked on for our recent projects, we're actually on global projects.
Mm.
So we also, I was literally just on a call with Omnibod, as they're working overnight for something that we're trying to get done. And so also having from a COVID standpoint, we know what we're living here in the US, but it's thinking of how are other countries having to respond to the virus and what are they in and kind of how is it ebb and flowing. So it's really had to open our eyes, as a business, as a whole project team, and really think about, it's not just what we're hearing on our news channels here, or it's not just what we're living in our own zip code, but how is everybody else around it having to deal with it
Mhm.
maybe a little bit differently, than what we are. So
Yeah.
had to broaden your thinking, right? I mean, that's really the only
Absolutely.
way we've been able to survive with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you've actually hit on this next question a little bit here, but could you just again kind of explain the types of businesses that you do work with? How do you know they will benefit from your services?
Yeah.
What is a good fit to you? And I know you've touched briefly on this, but you can again reiterate anything that's needed.
Yeah, no, I think for us it's larger companies,
Mhm.
that have already decided to invest in some big project.
Right.
So whether that's a multi-billion dollar company that is overhauling an entire ERP, or how they're doing their CRM system for all their customer management. So they've already decided to make an investment to help their business strategy, or if there's a merger going on between two companies, right? And saying, we have already invested and that is our strategy to come together, then that's what, they're going to end up doing. So I think that for us, our targets, if you want to think of them as the client target,
Mhm.
it really is more around, are they big enough, and are they, I would say, stable enough to select and invest in a particular strategy. We've tried to do help with smaller businesses that may have multiple initiatives going on, and actually it doesn't work that well, simply because they're fighting fires and they're having to be flexible and nimble and all those good things that entrepreneurs love to do. But yet, for how we are currently, structured for our model, you need a little bit more stability with it. And you really need to be able to say, I'm investing in the long run to kind of see it all the way through to make sure that we get our employees, up and running at the end of this.
Okay. All right. And so then with that being said, there are a lot of other consulting firms that do work with those larger country or companies. So how do you
Mhm.
differentiate from your competitors?
Great question. Um, it, so it kind of gets to a little bit, um, how do I say? So it gets a little bit to the piece of, most consulting firms and larger stuff have marketing strategies, have ways that they get out there into, the market and let people know that they're there and how they can offer, and they set their targets for business growth and all of those things. Um, let's just say from pen perspective, at this point, it really has been more just about the large clients that I'm working with, and they have continued to ask me back for the next projects and the next projects. And so right now, what it's played out as is almost a multi-year, more engagement of multiple projects, but by the particular company. And so having to differentiate myself, I just keep showing up for what they ask. And we
Having
just,
that relationship.
yeah, it is. It's all about the relationship piece for me. Now, I've lived in a different place before, right? With the company, and
Mhm.
especially when we were first starting out. And, we were like, well, where does that next customer come from? And where is that next one? Because maybe a previous person won't call, or maybe they'll be done with all their initiatives. And
Mhm.
so we won't have that next thing coming through. And so I think it's a valid question, because I know it needs to be on my radar, and it should always be on a business's radar of,
Mhm.
how do we offer value and present ourselves to people so that they can see that value and say, hey, I think this really might be a good connection for us. Why don't you come in and let's talk about some things.
Yeah,
But at this point, it just, that hasn't been a necessity, honestly, for the last handful of years.
that's great. That's really great.
It is not normal at all, and I know that, and I am very grateful that
Right.
that
Yeah.
is not, that type of setting. But I will say, one of the exciting pieces about it is that, as as I look at what the long play is for the company,
Mhm.
don't want to always just be project based, right? So one of the things that I think is really starting to just rub at me is that we're only getting to help the companies that we're working with at that time. And I really think that the type of projects and types of methods that we're putting together, um, could actually be a broader type of message.
Yeah.
So it's starting to rethink the business model
Yeah.
and see, is there a way that we can change from those other consulting companies that are very, what's our scope, what's our time frame, what's our deliverables, right? And step away from that traditional consulting model,
Yeah.
and you get a little bit blended into more of, I don't, and I don't even know what it blends into, right? If it's
Mhm.
more of the social media strategy overall, and just gets a little bit more, amoeba like, of, well,
Mhm.
this topic comes up and then this topic comes up,
Yeah.
so So yeah, it's definitely something we're thinking about though, of
Yeah.
as what that's going to evolve.
Well, you hit on something there that I actually kind of want to transition to.
Okay.
And that is, you were talking a little bit about the future and kind of where Tri-10 is going. And so I actually want to ask you, how do you see Tri-10 uh, or or how are you looking to the future? What are your company's objectives?
Yeah.
How do you measure this
Yeah.
along?
No, I think it really is kind of, it's not necessarily by numbers driven, right? It's not seeing that you have a service line that's just not generating or meeting your revenue goals. So you
Right.
have to kind of dial back on that and come up with the next new thing, right? Or it's not like a product isn't selling anymore.
Mhm. Yeah.
Or the cost to make that product has exceeded, and so your margins are shot. None of that is what's driving our future. I think what's simply driving our future is listening to what the current clients are asking for, seeing how kind of I've been asked to change and help
Mhm.
them change the way they're thinking a little bit,
Yeah.
and blending that in to try to stay a step ahead. Because I think same thing, right? If you go back to our main service that we offer is the change management,
Yes.
the
Yeah.
way that you're successful with that is you are always 2 or 3 steps ahead of where the rest of the project is, right? And how I talked about the lens is always on the very last day of the project of,
Yeah.
is that end user ready for that day?
Hmm.
So I apply that to our own business. I apply that to thinking of, what does that last day need to look like, or what's that next year for Tri-10 need to look like, and stay a step ahead. So I don't want it to be a lagging of all of a sudden, well, I had 3 clients ask for this, and then I had to scramble and come up with what that looks like.
Yeah.
I want to listen to just what they're asking for in conversations. And frankly, what my gut is telling me needs to happen differently for them to be successful. And then start formulating what that offering looks like and start transitioning to it.
Okay.
So there's enough flexibility in what we do, right? Because it's
Mhm.
not a product set. It is
Mhm.
not a manufacturing line that we have to have,
Right. Yeah,
completely
you don't have a quota.
perfect. Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's just one of those of just it really is just intuition and listen. A hell of a strategy there, isn't it? But
Yeah.
that's really kind of where I feel is the best way. And your question about COVID and how has that changed the stuff?
Yeah.
That's probably the biggest driver that has really made me think about, how do we need to change up things for the next 2, 3, 5 years,
Mhm.
right? Because I don't believe that we will have large companies going back into, large conference room settings, or, the big buildings, or the stack of cubes. I think those days are passing because it doesn't make good business sense. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, you can reduce your overhead and your cost and a whole bunch of those things. And we've kind of learned a different way to work together.
Yeah.
And so I think taking that as a lead and say, how can I make that a good opportunity for how to engage with your employees and figure out what that next big change is?
Mhm.
I think that I need to explore that a little bit more for what that next iteration or the future of Tri-10 looks like.
Yeah, and so speaking of Tri-10 and just kind of like the value it's really adding. I mean, I really like to hear the fact that you're listening to your clients and everything else and what's needed in the future.
Yeah.
So then, how do you see Tri-10 adding to the value? Um, we can just say in the greater Kansas City area or outside of that.
I mm, I think it's 2 things, right? I think one of them is that inside the walls of the company, of whatever client I'm working with, the value add is that you are considering everybody that's going to get impacted.
Hmm.
So the companies that ask us to come and work with them are the ones that they want to know what what it will look like and what their employees will have to do, and they want to invest in that before it's just simply reacting to the employee having to do something new, right? And so I think that's the value piece, is that they know they need to put some attention to it along the journey instead of reacting after the fact, because they didn't think about it beforehand. So I
Yeah.
think that's the value within the walls of the company. Outside of the walls of the company, though, and the greater Kansas City area piece of it, I mean, I think that it's anytime that you can have a business within the market that, does put high priority on the employee themselves and the success of the employee. And as long as that voice is out there in the community, and I can, talk to other clients about it, whether we work with them or not, or whether if through, I'm sitting on a board of a community organization, and they ask, hey Jenny, what are you working on? Just having that voice out there that encourages people to think from an employee perspective, not necessarily from the C-suite or from a directive perspective and having it done to the employee, but instead of thinking about it from the employee's own view. I just think that's a happier kind of community. It's a happier business landscape. Um,
Right.
yeah, just adds a good diverse perspective to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do understand that you're on the United Way.
Oh
And
yeah.
so, I think this is my favorite question, by the way, of all of them. Uh, so, because you're on the United Way in the Greater Kansas City area, what do you think the importance is of service is within the business community? What significance do you hold to that?
It's huge. It's huge. There's no way, and it's the way that I was raised. And so I am just so thankful that I can actually, through whether it's the United Way board, whether it was Girl Scouts, whether it was, a multitude of them, right, that I've had the opportunity to serve with. I think that it's so important for business leaders to get outside of their own company and to look at the market that they're in, and to spend some time thinking about people outside of their employee population, and having them think and look and listen to what the ups and downs of our community are, right? I think that we are limited when we only think about what our employee population looks like or what our business is supposed to do. I think having that broader perspective of what's in our market and who are the people that are having to go through things in maybe a different way than what we experience every day,
Yeah.
I think that just opens up your eyes. And as a leader of a company, I think it also opens up things a little bit better for you to listen to your own employees' needs, and to be a little bit more flexible and responsive to that, instead of maybe so directive in nature of, nope, this is what we need to do. So I think putting kind of those pieces together, it helps the community, because it brings different perspectives, skills, different angles that people look at things. I love those United Way board meetings, because they have really done a nice job putting a blended group of people together, that always look at the numbers, or always looks at the people side, or always looks at just different ways of looking at the exact same issue, but having a rich conversation about what's a good way to get to a solution for that.
Yeah.
And so the more you do that outside of your own company, you take little bits of those conversations with you back into your own boardroom. And so, it's like, oh yeah, we kind of talked about it that way the other day. Huh, that kind of applies here too. So I think it serves your own company, but it also serves the community.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes with I think that comes with principles and leadership, and so I'm going to kind of transition here because of that. And I think another business leader that really kind of shows those principles and really cares about service is Charles Koch, who he applies some specific principles at Koch Industries, and he really cares about trying to improve worker performance and just really wants to help people in general. And so I'm actually kind of curious if you have any other principles or any other values that either informally or formally you add to your company. And I understand, it's not Coke Industries
Oh,
or anything of that sort, but just on again, it can be informally. But go ahead.
yeah, no, I think our big one that we have is so simple of it's just we want to do good work for good clients,
Yeah,
right? And so that's the main thing with it is that it's we all have different opinions of ways to do something, and it's not necessarily right or wrong, right? It's just a different way to do something,
yeah,
and what may work better today we might need to revise that for a couple of weeks from now. And so having that flexibility and the willingness to adjust, I think is really kind of a couple of those principal things that we go with. I think the other thing that really resonates not only just for Tri 10 but for the clients that we work with is that everybody's perspective counts. And so, a lot of the work that we do so much is, and I'm trying to think, it goes nicely and it complements with kind of the other part for the change management, which is meet them where they're at. So
yeah,
that's the other one that we really do, right? Because you've seen, and I'm sure as you've talked to others, right, you have a couple different leadership styles out there. And there are some of them where they're like, nope, this is the way. You go out, you do it this way. And I don't care if you don't understand it. I don't care if you agree with it or not. This is how we're going to go do it. I take more of the approach of where is everybody at today?
hmm,
And what's their level of understanding, what's their perspective, all of that, and
hmm,
then try to meet them there and then move them along the path on that journey. And that means everybody's going to be at a different pace. It means people are going to resonate with certain things more than others. And so you as the leader and the communicator need to adjust what you are saying, how you are saying it, the number of times you say it, all of those different things. You have to be flexible and you have to listen and adjust if you want to get everybody to the finish line successfully.
right. No,
So
and
I think those are my main ones.
yeah, no, and I think they're great. I mean, I actually, when you were talking about that, I kind of remembered a little bit of that was Charles Koch. A little bit, he really loves the idea of letting ideas flow,
Yeah.
and that's kind of something he really hits on.
Yep.
But tell me a little bit about your leadership philosophy at Tri 10.
Hmm.
How do you go about implementing your own leadership?
That's a great question. My own leadership style. So there's a hodgepodge going on here. So I mean, I think one of the things that a lot of my folks have said is that with me, I kind of approach it of leave no room for doubt, right? So it's where I stand, and the principles that I follow,
Mhm.
um, and that if we say we're going to do something, then there is no room of doubt that we will not accomplish it.
Right,
That means we may have different ways in which we do it, and we've had to adjust, but we're still going to get there.
right.
And that piece of it. And I think that I've already mentioned it a couple of times, but from a leadership style, I am a huge
Mhm.
listener. And so I think that that's one of the things is that being being a Virgo, I am completely detailed and I know what I think the answer should be, but I've had to learn over the years to listen first, and that it's a better solution and it's more effective, and you have more people that are willing to come along on the journey with you if you listen first as opposed to if you state something first.
Yeah.
So I think those are, yeah, I try. There are better days than others that it works, but that's part of the fun of being a leader.
I always tell my students, listen to hear, not to respond. And so, and so, so I really like that. So then finally, my last question here for you is, what are 2, 3 year two or three pieces of advice that you would give to future business leaders on how to improve their own companies or their
Yeah.
own startups or anything of the sort.
I think probably the first one is don't feel like you have to do it on your own. Is that it is okay and it is encouraged to ask for help. So there are so many people that I think that they still have that perspective that if they need to ask for help, they see that as weakness. And
Hmm.
I don't see that as weakness. Actually see it as strength. That if you know your limitations and you know that you may not have all the creative answers, I see it as a strength to know that it's time to reach out for help and to get that. So I would really encourage, and there are so many resources that are out there, and none of us have to be expert of everything, right? And so find the thing that you're good at, know that that's what you're good at, and then know a bunch of other people that are good at everything else, and
Yeah.
know who to reach out to and contact. There's a reason I didn't go to law school, but there's a reason I have multiple lawyers as friends that I can reach out to, you know? And so it's just that same kind of thing. I think the other bit of advice that I would give, and I'm still learning this one myself, so I will listen to my own advice, is find out what you're good at and stick with it. There are a lot of businesses that, as we get into difficult times, with COVID, yes, we have to be flexible and nimble and adjust, but I think there's a little bit of caution you need to put with that of trying to be too much to people and trying to do too many things or trying to have too broad of a stroke, and you end up kind of depleting the value that you add and what you can bring to people. um, it starts adding in a little bit of question, from the customer of, they really know what they're doing, or was this just something that they're like, hey, we can do that too, so
Right.
I think it's, take the time to figure out what you're good at and stick with it, and then go to market, with that piece.
Yeah, no, that's great. And thank you. Hey, Jenny, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview.
No
It means a lot to me. So
No
again,
worries. I
thank
hope it was helpful, and I hope my little dog didn't snore too loud, and interrupt
no,
during.
no, you're fine.
Good.
You're fine.
I started hearing her snore. I was like, oh, here we go. Okay, what happens?
Yeah.